All righty, committee, we're going to get this underway and call the committee to order. And thanks everybody for joining us today, not only here but also online. Might mention that Senator Pyle is also monitoring from online today. We've got a hearing on Senate Bill 24. Before we get to that, I will mention committee that we have minutes from last week that will be sent out, so you might have time to review that, and later in the week we will approve those. We'll also start with bill introductions. Are there any bill introductions today? Mr. Federico.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. John Federico of Federico Consulting, Federico Durst Consulting. Seeking introduction as a committee bill of RS 0347, dealing with electric vehicle charging stations, and that they not be treated as a public utility.
Committee, are there any objections to the introduction of this bill as a committee bill from Senate Utilities? If not, all those in favor say aye. All those opposed, nay. The bill is so introduced. Thank you, Mr. Federico. By the way, for those of you who are listening in online or watching online, you can find testimony on the Kansas Legislature website. That's ks.gov under the Senate Utilities Committee, and look for the little link to the miscellaneous and early release testimony file under today's date. And the testimony will be listed in alphabetical order and not in the order of those giving testimony. Also for our conferees today, just remember to identify yourself when you walk up to the microphone so folks who are online can tell who is testifying. So we're going to open our hearing on Senate Bill 24, prohibiting municipalities from imposing restrictions on customers' use of energy based upon source of energy. And first we'll call in our revisor, Mr. Sterling, to give us a quick overview of the bill.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is Matt Sterling in the revisor's office. Before I start real fast on Senate Bill 24, I would just note for the minutes, the request that Mr. Federico introduced, the RS number for that, he inadvertently read the House one. The one for the Senate is RS 0695.
RS 0695.
Correct.
Thank you very much, and noted for the minutes on that. Thank you, Mr. Sterling. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Hopefully the committee has my memo. It's pretty brief on Senate Bill 24. As the title says, the bill would prohibit a municipality from imposing any ordinance, resolution, requirement, or provision or plan that restricted an end-use customer's use of a public utility based upon the source of energy that was to be delivered to that customer. The bill would apply to natural gas and public electric utilities and be effective upon publication in the statute book. I'd be happy to try to answer questions of the committee.
Committee, any questions for our revisor? Senator Francisco.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. One question I had is there a definition of end user? And a follow-up to that would be, would that include a municipality? But those are two questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. The bill, there is no definition for end use customer. Depending on how this was read, I could see that applying to a municipality being a customer as well. So not just talking about the restrictions on actions of a municipality, but a municipality viewed as an end use customer as well. So that may be something we have to look at.
And following up to that, would an end use customer in the case of a building that's owned by one individual but rented or has a tenant as another, would the end user be the owner or the tenant?
I wouldn't say that the bill specifies either way. So again, maybe something to to inquire with the conferees and as to the intent of the bill and how we want to have that tightened up.
Thank you.
Thanks, Senator. Thank you, Mr. Advisor. Any other questions for Matt Sterling before we get started? Seeing none, I think we'll go ahead and begin our oral testimony. Also, I'm not going to impose any particular strict time restrictions, but just for conferees, to the extent you can, don't be redundant. Just add to the testimony of previous conferees, and we can move through, and then we will allot time for questions after our testimony. We have a number of oral and written testimony proponents here. So let's start off with Patrick Vogelsberg of Kansas Gas Energy. Mr. Vogelsberg.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Patrick Vogelsberg, and I'm here on behalf of Kansas Gas Service. Kansas Gas Service is in strong support of Senate Bill 24. I'll get right into the bill and talk about some of the highlights, the need for it, and then maybe walk through the legislation itself and see if I can answer some of those questions that were brought up earlier. This legislation we feel is needed to make certain that Kansans, households and businesses continue to have the ability to have choice in regards to which energy source they have. The origin for this sort of legislation got started about a year and a half ago when the city of Berkeley in California was really one of the first cities in this country to go down a path of banning natural gas in new construction. And since then, we've seen similar proposals be enacted or suggested in a variety of different U.S. cities. Closer to home, we've seen efforts in Norman, Oklahoma, and Lawrence, Kansas. We feel that these sorts of proposals are short-sighted and they will only hinder a community's ability to reduce emissions, but at the same time placing a significant economic burden on their businesses and households. In 2020, several states took the opportunity to go ahead and pass legislation. So far, Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arizona, and Tennessee have passed energy choice legislation. And we feel that Kansas should join that list of states and make it clear that Kansas is a state where all energy options are going to be available to their citizens. Senate Bill 24, I want to hit on 4 points as far as what it does. Number one, it ensures that Kansans continue to have the ability to choose the energy source that works for them, for their household or for that business. And that decision won't be mandated upon them by a municipality. Number two, and very important, it'll help keep utility bills low for Kansans, that they continue to have access to affordable natural gas. Number three, it provides regulatory certainty. Energy policy such as this is a matter of statewide concern, and we shouldn't have a patchwork of local energy policy across the state. And lastly, I think that this legislation will provide necessary guidance to cities in Kansas that may wish to pursue some sustainability plans or climate action plans. Kansas has a longstanding history of supporting all of the above approach to energy. In Kansas, we're blessed with options, and we should send that signal across the state. Because our fear that the opposite signal is being sent by states that allow these local restrictions to go in place. The message that those states send is that if you are a household or a business and you want to expand in that state or relocate to that state, you're going to do so with less energy options and potentially less affordable energy options. And the other states that have pursued this, I think they're sending the opposite signal, that you're going to come to that state and you're going to have all those available, and you're not going to face a patchwork of local energy policy. To the bill itself, I just want to kind of walk through the legislation, the language here, because I think it's important to understand the elements of this legislation and who is actually restricted by this. So number one, you have to view is there a municipality that is passing this restriction? So if it's a municipality, the statute would apply, but it would not apply to an individual household or business owner or a developer. All right, they can make those decisions. This legislation would not impact someone if they wanted to go 100% electric, or if they wanted to have mixed fuel sources. It would not affect those folks. You also have to have a binding action. This is an ordinance that would have some sort of a binding action, some sort of a restriction on energy use. So aspirational goals with no actual teeth in them would not be applicable here. And in addition to that, does that binding action impair the end-use customer's use? And then next is, does that impairment, is it based upon the source of energy? And lastly, or to put it another way, is the ordinance or the binding action source neutral? It doesn't matter whether it's natural gas or electricity. If it's source neutral, then this legislation would not apply. And then lastly, you need to identify who is the end-use customer. And for us, that end-use customer is the actual customer that would be on the account. And so to answer Senator Francisco's earlier question, that could be the property owner, that could be the landlord, or that could be the tenant. It would be whoever would be on the account would be our understanding of who the end-use customer is. And that would include the municipality themselves. And so if the municipality wanted to restrict their energy sources on buildings that they would own, it's our view that this legislation would not prohibit them from doing that. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'm happy to answer any questions at the appropriate time, either now or after the other proponents, but we would just respectfully request that this committee support this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Vogelsberg. We'll open up to questions. We'll reserve enough time here.
Thank you.
To do so. Next, we have Jerry Watkins from Black Hills Energy. Jerry?
Thank you, Chairman Thompson and members of the committee for the opportunity to provide testimony today in favor of Senate Bill 24. My name is Jerry Watkins. I'm the general manager for Kansas Gas for Black Hills Energy. We proudly serve about 115,000 customers across 65 Kansas communities here in the state. Overall, our Black Hills family serves 1.2 million customers across 8 states in the Midwest. We have both gas and electric service. As you just heard from Patrick, we wholeheartedly agree with the 4 items that Senate Bill 24 seeks to accomplish. We also know that preserving energy choice is critical to Kansans today. There's no doubt that natural gas is a great value for consumers. Right now, customers can heat their home, heat their water, cook meals for less than $2 a day. $2 a day, that's economical. Natural gas is also a great value for our commercial and industrial sector as well. Low natural gas prices are an economic driver. It helps to boost consumer pricing, power, and confidence, while improving cost competitiveness for American-made products. The elimination of natural gas as an energy source would have a dramatic economic impact on residences and business across our great state. Nationally, the average household would see their energy cost increase by nearly 50% if natural gas was eliminated. This does not include costs associated with upgrading of appliances, upgrading of electrical panels or wiring, or appliance replacement costs. Likewise, businesses would face similar energy upgrades and costs. Simply put, their manufacturing processes and specialized equipment that depend on natural gas as a sole means of energy. The effort to ban natural gas isn't just a coastal phenomenon. There are efforts underway here as well that impact Kansas. In March of 2020, the City of Lawrence approved ordinance number 9744 that set goals for all energy sectors to be 100% renewable by 2035. The ordinance seeks to eliminate natural gas as an energy source, and that would have the unintended effect of raising the bills of nearly 32,000 customers by 50% or more. About 85% of Lawrence households would experience that spike, and that does not include the cost to replace, again, furnaces, water heaters, cook stoves, or electric panel or wiring upgrades. Just think of the impact that that could have on the local economy. Overall, Black Hills supports pursuing all sensible paths to utilizing clean energy and reducing greenhouse gas emissions while providing affordable, reliable energy for our customers today and tomorrow. As a company, we share a goal of reducing emissions and believe a collaborative partnership with community stakeholders can best set a path going forward. We believe natural gas can and should play an important role in the path forward, and we do believe that sustainability should focus on a partnership with renewables, with electricity, with natural gas, with technology, and the smart use of our existing infrastructure systems. According to a report by the National Energy Technology Laboratory, natural gas has already reduced the nation's carbon footprint by more than 50%. Natural gas can continue to shrink the country's carbon footprint and can support our shared goals of reducing emissions. So we know that climate change is a sensitive issue, and it's a challenging problem that we must face. There's no question about that. But with technology getting better every day, now is not the time to restrict energy choices. Partnerships, options, and diversity work together to solve tough problems like these. Discord, limitations, and closed minds lead to bad choices and costly solutions. So I'd like to leave you with three main thoughts today. Number one is that consumers want choice. I think we all know that. Nobody wants to have their options dictated or their options taken away from them. Number two, that eliminating natural gas as an energy option creates uncertainty for residences, for our businesses, for our industrial sector. And then number three, that Black Hills is committed to partnering with communities to seek and implement sensible greenhouse reduction strategies that enhance the quality of life. So with that, I appreciate the opportunity to represent Black Hills in front of the committee today. We'll stand for questions when appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Watkins.
Thank you.
And again, we will make time for those questions a little bit later on. Next up, Bart Armstrong from Atmos Energy. Bart.
Thank you, Chairman. Thank you, committee members. So I will try not to be redundant. I do want to, I'm Bart Armstrong, the president of the Colorado-Kansas Division, and do want to take just a moment to say thank you all. I know others have said the same thing. Y'all have read extensive testimony, heard testimony. You got a full agenda and a full session for sure. So we certainly do genuinely appreciate the time to get to come in and visit with y'all and share some comments. So I'm representing Atmos on behalf of the Senate Bill 24, supported that, and do just want to thank y'all again for the opportunity. So I live in Olathe. I've been in Kansas, been with the gas company just short of 30 years. I live in Olathe and been with the gas company for 13 years. When I started, a little bit about myself. So I started with marketing and sales in Kansas for Atmos. So we worked with our end-use customers, residential, commercial, industrial, and out in western part of Kansas, irrigation customers. So very in tune with the marketing sales activities, what Atmos does, and transitioned into the operations where really I was just over the distribution of natural gas services to all our 135,000 customers. So now I'm fairly new into my role, but I just want to give a little bit of that background and some of my history. So our employees, we live in these communities, we live in these towns, we go to school, we go to church, we play ball with them. So we're very tied to these communities. We're part of those communities, those people we live with and work with. And just want to say that we've been dedicated to Kansas for over 100 years. We invest in those communities, not just socially, but financially we invest in those communities. We invest in our current gas infrastructure, and we're very fortunate, as most of us know, we've got some really high growth areas in Kansas, and we serve a lot of Johnson County, Overland Park, parts of Overland Park, parts of Lawrence and Olathe. So we're very fortunate to have some really high growth areas. We run gas main every single day to serve customers' needs in some of those areas for our subdivisions and the developers. So we know our customers want that product. We see it every day. So we're investing in our current infrastructure and our growth, and we'll continue to do so. And we're reliable, you know, not just on cold days like today, and where Kansas, as we all know, we're susceptible to the ice storms, where we continue to provide heat your water to cook. A couple of years ago, if y'all recall, in Linwood, Kansas, where we had the tornado, you know, we set up an incident command system there in Linwood, handed out water, handed out food, made sure that those customers had gas. They didn't need heat. It was in the middle of summer, but they were cooking for some of the first responders, and our service was available, and we didn't skip a beat. So just kind of share some of those things. So we would just ask for your support in the Senate Bill 24. We feel like this does provide that, that energy choice for Kansans that they deserve. Feel like Senate Bill 24 accomplishes that. We just ask for your support and then say thank you. And with that, I'll hush at the appropriate time. I'll be glad to answer any questions. So thank you again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Armstrong. Up next, we have Scott Schneider of the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association. Scott?
Thank you, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. I'm Scott Schneider. I work for Hinkle Law Firm and representing the Kansas Restaurant and Hospitality Association. We supported this bill last year because the entity that sued the city of Berkeley was the California Restaurant Association. And I called Patrick because I kind of lost track of it, given what's been happening to restaurants across the state. And I said, surely this thing's over, isn't it? And so I looked it up, and absolutely it was not. They're still arguing standing and ripeness and kind of a first layer of the lawsuit that's taken a year and a half. So obviously the restaurants are here because we need to cook food. We need to cook food using whatever source that the cook wants to use. You think of how do you cook on a wok without fire? So we were taking surveys last night at Chester's in Wichita, and like, well, we could do wood, we could do coal, we could do peat, but we shouldn't have to deal with the local governments the way that this last year has kind of brought about some of the uncertainty. I've testified, I think, 8 times now on various issues. This pandemic has kind of brought in awareness that our local governments doing their best. They're our friends, they're our neighbors, but they haven't been acting as sturdy as we would hope, given the stress that was on them. And we think something like this, preempting a very common sense piece, it's your tool that the Constitution gives you to implement a uniform rule. And this would be an orderly and a proper thing to do. So we'll stand for any questions at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Schneider. Our next conferee is Dan Murray from the National Federation of Independent Business. Dan?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Dan Murray. I'm the Kansas State Director for the National Federation of Independent Business. NFIB is the voice of small business and represents over 4,000 small business owners from across the state of Kansas. Small business owners know that energy competition is critical, that a ban on natural gas will decrease competition and increase their costs. Every 4 years, NFIB conducts a business problems and priorities study. And in our last one that was released in 2020, of the 75 problems that were identified by small business owners, number 16 was electricity rates and costs, and number 19 was the cost of propane, natural gas, et cetera. It's a driving impact on their viability as small business owners. As Mr. Schneider pointed out in these times, particularly of late, slim margins, and those slim margins can be eliminated with increased electrical costs. So we did a study about this survey of our members this off season heading into this session, and a whopping 88% of our members said that they supported a statewide uniform prohibition on municipalities from adopting these kinds of bans that eliminate choice for small business owners. With that, Mr. Chairman, I will stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, Mr. Murray.
Thank you.
Next up, we have Jason Watkins from Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. Jason?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm Jason Watkins, here on behalf of the Wichita Regional Chamber of Commerce. Won't repeat what the other conferees have said, but would say that we stand in strong agreement with those sentiments. We'll add just one maybe different type of flavor to this conversation, and that is the perspective from those in South Central Kansas that are members of the Wichita Chamber. We have a lot of great businesses covering all different types of sectors, but we're very, very heavy into manufacturing. If you've flown on an airplane, there's a good chance that if not that entire plane, a good part of that plane was built in South Central Kansas. We have energy, refineries, the list goes on and on. All of those industries are very reliant on energy. The largest electric user, for example, is based just right outside of Wichita. I tell their story often because, like many of our other manufacturers, while they're in South Central Kansas, they're not only in South Central Kansas. And so take a company like Spirit, take a company like OxyChem, large manufacturing, very reliant on energy, but also affordable energy. They're competing against other operations in their company in other states. And so when they have an opportunity to build a new wing or a new fuselage for, say, Airbus or Boeing, or to make a certain type of chemical for another corporation in the United States, they're bidding based on their cost of manufacturing that product. Energy, of course, is a big part of that. We lose out sometimes because of competitive issues with other states. We're very fortunate in Kansas that our citizens and our businesses benefit from a wide array of energy sources. If we start allowing locals to ban certain types of sources, that will increase the cost of energy. That will make us less competitive. And that has the real possibility of driving out some large manufacturers who, by the way, provide great benefits and high pay to Kansans. So we stand in strong support of this legislation, Mr. Chairman, and would urge the committee to report it favorable for passage, and happy to stand for questions at the appropriate time.
Thank you, sir. And our final oral, well, except for WebEx, we have Elizabeth Patton from Americans for Prosperity. Elizabeth?
Hello, my name is Elizabeth Patton. I am the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, Kansas. I will try to not be redundant. A lot of good things have already been said about this bill, so I'm just going to highlight a couple that are also in our written testimony. So you've heard a lot of the positive things about energy choice already, so I will skip to the point that, as a lot of you may already know, more than 70% of Kansans rely on natural gas or propane for home heating, which is well above the national average. So when you think about that in our state, and the idea that these local bans ultimately will serve as regressive taxes that hurt low and middle income consumers, and they will exacerbate energy poverty for our state. So essentially what we've already heard, same thing. Top-down energy policies that eliminate consumer choice will only make energy poverty worse in our state. This bill does a great job of addressing that troubling trend that we've seen nationwide that has already been talked about, and it helps our state adopt a fuel-neutral policy. And just to reiterate, again, this is preventing Green New Deal style energy policies on the local level that are really designed more to force politically preferred energy sources on Kansans rather than achieve any environmental goal. So that is the main thesis of my written testimony. Would be happy to stand for questions and get into further data on that as well at the appropriate time. Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Appreciate that. Our next and final oral conferee is Ernest Cutsley from the American Association for Retired Persons, and Ernest is online. Hopefully, I don't know if Ernest, can you hear us? Or can we hear him? We don't have our IT person here. What?
Hello.
Are you there, Ernest?
I am, sir.
Okay, we can hear you, so go ahead. Make sure you unmute your microphone, Ernest.
Can you hear me now, sir?
Yeah, we can. Go right ahead.
Thank you. I'm sorry. Mr. Chairman and committee members, thank you for this opportunity. AARP Kansas supports Senate Bill 24 to keep utility rates affordable and allow customers the right to use the fuel of their choice to heat their homes and cook their food. Many of our 291,000 Kansas members are on low or fixed incomes and or have been adversely affected by COVID-19. These customers do not have the additional money it would take to switch to a more expensive fuel source. We know that natural gas is currently much more affordable and plentiful than electricity, and restricting or eliminating it would increase both electric and gas bills. And further, the cost of switching to an all-electric service or purchasing new appliances per household would be very costly. While we do support sustainable energy policies, we oppose natural gas bans. Therefore, we respectfully request your support of Senate Bill 24. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Ernest. Committee, before we open up for questions, I want to call your attention to written testimony from Ed Cross of Kansas Independent Oil and Gas Association, Chris McGowan from Eastern Kansas Oil and Gas, Sean Miller from Kansas Building Industries Association, Greg Knoll of Propane Marketers Association, Curtis Sneeden of Greater Topeka Chamber of Commerce, Kent Eccles from the Kansas Chamber of Commerce, Mark Toom of Kansas Association Realtors, and Bonnie Lowe from the Chamber of Lawrence, Kansas. And their testimony should be in your packet and available for you. And so please take time to review that. At this point, I'm going to open it up to the committee for any questions they have for any of the conferees. Committee, any questions? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think I'll start with Mr. Murray. And you made a comment that was interesting to me because you said it would be important to have a statewide restriction on municipalities taking these actions. And yet my understanding in reading the bill is that it would only apply to municipalities who were part of a public utility or investor-owned service area. So why would we look at having a different ability for municipalities outside of those public utility service areas for those inside?
Chairman and Senator Francisco, I think my comments were related to the survey that we conducted of our members. Our members support a ban or a prohibition on municipalities from adopting particular energy source bans. In this case, I think the topic is natural gas. But so that's where our members are coming from. I think the format or the structure in which that's adopted would be up to this committee. But our members have told us that energy choice not only increases competition and decreases cost or ensures that their costs are as low as possible, but also they don't, there's no particular method to their madness, so to speak, but that they generally, small business owners do oppose municipalities from adopting bans of particular sources of energy. That clear as mud.
And you would agree that they would like to have that ban statewide?
I think in terms of uniformity and certainty across the state, that predictability of energy prices from one community to another for a small business owner is important. And that applies across the board to regulations that small business owners face. It applies to the tax rates. It applies to various things across the state. That small business owners want predictability. They want uniformity as much as it can be attained.
Thanks, Senator Francisco. Thanks, Dan. I'm guessing, let me turn it over to Senator Warren. Senator, do you have a question?
I do, but go ahead if you have comments to make. I can wait.
What's that?
I do have a question, but it might be answered if you have comments to make.
You go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Thank you to all the conferees who testified in support of this. My question did sort of get answered by Mr. Vogelsberg regarding have other states enacted a statute, and you said Oklahoma, Louisiana, Arizona, and Tennessee. If with the chair, if he would approach and thank you. So the question is, have these been successfully implemented in those 4 states, and are there other states like Kansas that are considering a bill such as this?
So those are the states that I mentioned are ones that have actually passed and have enacted those. So 4 states right off the bat, and this was, if you look at it, Berkeley was July of 2019, and already in 2020, 4 states came right out and passed this. We anticipate several other states are considering this as well. I'm aware of Indiana, Missouri, also pursuing this. For our company, One Gas, we will be joining with a similar coalition to pass this in Texas. But I anticipate over the next sessions, some of the sessions haven't started across the states, but I anticipate there will be several others that join in pursuing this legislation.
Thank you. If I could have one more question. The bill has defined public utility to mean any natural gas or electric public utility as defined in statute elsewhere, 66-104. And we've heard from lots of different industries represented here today, and are the industries, the stakeholders, if you will, that we've heard from today satisfied that public utility as defined in 66-104 is comprehensive enough and broad enough to cover what's needed?
I think so. So when we looked at this issue, obviously we were looking at it from a perspective of a statewide public utility, and Kansas Gas Service is the largest local distribution company that fits that definition. Our service territory, roughly 2/3 of the state geographically. So one of the issues that's uniquely problematic to a public utility such as ours is that what happens in a city that wants to regulate energy, its effects will go outside of that city. So what happens in one city, and this, for an example, in Black Hills could speak to this with a specific reference to the city of Lawrence, but what would happen in one of our cities, the consequences of that local decision would be felt by our company and likely to have an impact of our customers outside of that local jurisdiction. So the consequences of that local decision don't stay there locally. I say that because the local control argument then starts deteriorating because those decisions, the impact of them don't just stay right there. And that is really why we've drafted this way, is that the impact to a statewide public utility on a local ordinance would be different versus a municipal utility where that decision would be specifically felt there and only affect those customers within that specific local jurisdiction.
Thank you. Mr. Chair, if there are any conferees who have different testimony to provide other than as provided Mr. Vogelsberg, would they have the opportunity to come up now and say so?
Absolutely. Yes,
you.
because I would like the definition of, I think this speaks to Senator Francisco's question about end user and whether or not we need to define that to be clear, because we certainly don't want to end up later on having to come back and fix this. We want to do it right the first time. So was your question answered satisfactorily?
Yes, if any other conferee has a different response that they're satisfied with the definition of public utility as put forth in the statute. I assume since you're all supporting it that you're okay with it. Yes. Okay. Thank you.
Any other questions? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So probably another question for Mr. Vogelsberg that I should just ask, particularly because he mentions the city of Lawrence in his testimony. You seem to be equating what the city of Lawrence did with what happened in Berkeley, California, and yet I see them to be very different. Can you clarify that for the committee so we can have a better understanding of that?
So, and I will start off with saying that the city of Lawrence is not our service territory. That's Black Hills service territory. So if there's anything unique to that, I would defer to them. But the city of Berkeley, what they did was ban natural gas hookups in new construction. All right, straightforward ban. My understanding of the ordinance in Lawrence is it sets up some goals for the future to hit clean energy benchmarks. And those benchmarks are set out at 2035 or 2050. And in that, they want to hit a goal for clean energy by this date and part of those benchmarks are for municipal operations and part of them are for citywide. Their definition of clean energy specifically excludes natural gas. And so while it has been phrased to us that those are still aspirational goals, in order to achieve them, they would need to go through a path of restricting natural gas, at least initially on municipally owned operations, and then later extend that out citywide.
Thank you. I would just like to comment that my understanding, and this is from a report in the National Guardian, was that Berkeley's restriction was on multifamily, residential, large, in most large structures, but gave exemptions for first floor retail, which I assume would be the restaurants and some other things. So it's interesting to see that the way that this is being handled is not necessarily a ban altogether. So I have a question now that's probably more general for any of the conferees. Why would electric public utilities be part of this bill, since it's much more difficult to identify the source of that within a particular municipality or to limit that source? We also understand that the electric utilities may be using more natural gas to be the backup for wind.
Right. I think the reason, and as you looked at other states that have passed this legislation, some have been very specific to natural gas. The way that we have drafted it here is really if an ordinance is drafted in a way to discriminate against natural gas in favor of electricity. And because we use that term discriminate against, we felt that it was best to at least identify who would be involved in that. And from our perspective, that would be electricity and natural gas.
That helps me understand that. I do have another question, and this goes back to the definition of end user. The way it's written, it seems to me saying a municipality shall not impose ordinances or resolutions or plans that restricts or has the effect on an end use customer's use of a public utility. So the concern would be, even if you were the owner of the building, if you are a municipality, can you make a plan to have your buildings not use natural gas because you're restricted from that plan? And my understanding is people were not wanting a municipality to not make its own choices for energy use.
Senator Francisco, I think our understanding of how this is drafted and our interpretation of it would be that if a city wanted to, a city would have, much like a homeowner or a business owner, they're the end-use customer, and they would be able to make those determinations on what their energy mix was. So if they wanted to go 100% electric for municipally owned buildings or property, they could do so under this. I will say that if that point needs to be clarified, I'm happy to have further discussions with you about that.
Thank you. I'd be very interested in that because I think there's another way to read it, which would be it restricts the municipality itself.
I might point out, too, that for the use of renewables, the quick ramping counter-cyclical generation comes from natural gas. So if we limit the use of natural gas, we're also limiting the potential to expand renewables across the state as well. Is that not correct, Mr. Vogelsberg?
Mr. Chairman, I want to stay inside my lane and not really get into the generation side where we just distribute directly to the customer. I'd have to defer to others as far as the technical components of that.
Okay, thank you, sir. Any other questions, committee? So if I understand this correctly, and I have a couple myself, this would not impose any restrictions on any end user to select whichever type of energy that they'd like to use. If they want to use natural gas, fine. If they want to use electricity, fine. If they want to use coal, they can do that. Correct?
Well, this legislation, you are correct. It would allow that end-use customer to choose between natural gas or electricity as provided by a state public utility defined here. So really the source of energy is electricity or natural gas.
Okay. Senator Francisco?
Could we ask the reviser to weigh in on that? Because I think that there are two different ways to interpret that.
Mr. Advisor, what's your opinion on this?
So there's a couple things that we need to parse out here, I think. When it comes to an end user, I think that the bill would not restrict in any way an individual's choice. The restriction is on the municipality. So the bill would be restricting a municipality from enacting anything that would then impose a restriction on an end user.
So if I understand that correctly, just the municipality, well, let's say a city, a municipality decided they, in their building of their, municipal buildings, they didn't want to use natural gas. They could do that, but they could not impose that restriction on the residents of that municipality, correct?
Well, to your first statement, I would say that that's vague, the way the bill is written. Because the method in which the municipality undertook that choice of their choice of energy for their own buildings, if that was done through the municipality adopting an ordinance or a plan or anything like that, arguably that would be restricted under the bill. So we may need to clarify some of that depending on what the intent is.
So we should probably have the carrier of the bill confer with our advisor just to make sure that we've got that language clear before we start working that bill. And I want to make sure that it's satisfactory in everybody's mind that we're not doing something that we don't intend to do. Is that fine, Mr. Vogelsberg? Okay. Mr. Advisor, I'll have Patrick Vogelsberg get in touch with you and you guys can hash out that and then we'll try to get those questions answered completely before we work the bill.
Very good.
Any other questions, committee? Senator Corson?
Sorry, I had a question for Mr. Vogelsberg. You started kind of going down this track of the local control argument and why you thought that that was not a strong argument in opposition, and then you understandably moved on. Can you kind of just finish that thought and just go down the rest of the way down that road?
So local control, from our position, when we look at a local control argument, there may be, that argument in general is stronger when the consequences of that decision are contained within that city's jurisdiction. These decisions to affect energy policy in a city in which a statewide public utility serves can have an impact on our business and our customers outside of that jurisdiction, is what my argument is. In that, so the consequences of that local decision are felt outside of that local jurisdiction. And so that's where we feel that the local control argument starts to break down, that those decisions aren't contained within that locality.
Can you just sort of finish that and talk about what those consequences are for your customers and for your business outside of the municipality that may pass something like this?
Well, generally speaking, it costs money for our infrastructure, and the more customers that we have utilizing that infrastructure, the more that those costs are spread across our customers or our rate base. And so a municipality restricting that in some way could lower the amount of customers that we have or the growth that we experience, which is beneficial to keep rates low. if that growth is eliminated, we would have concerns that it would put some upward pressure on our costs that wouldn't be recovered by the same shrinking number of customers.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator. Any other questions, committee? Senator Francisco?
Thank you, and perhaps Mr. Vogelsberg can answer this as well. In the list of what a municipality would not be able to do, it includes, rules, provisions, standards, permits, but also says, or has the effect thereof. Who would be the determiner of whether a particular action that a municipality takes has a particular effect? And I'm just hoping that we don't make this money that goes to lawyers instead of reduces energy costs.
Well, thank you for the question, Senator. I think ultimately, if a city's ordinance was felt to be overly broad and to actually go the distance of impairing an end-use customer's use of a public utility, that end-use customer would need to avail themselves under this statute. And in doing so, they would have access to file a complaint in our courts and have a determination be made, but they would need to provide evidence that their use was actually impaired. And having access to our courts is the common area to go get redress and utilize our statutes. So.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I have one more request, and this is not from the proponents, but I'm wondering if we could ask our research staff to identify which municipalities would be affected under this bill and which would not. My understanding is gas service has a much larger service area than perhaps some of the electric utilities, but I think it would be good for us to know who this bill is going to be affecting and who is not, if we choose to take this action.
Heather O'Hara, did you hear that request? Can you get that done to us before Thursday, you think? Okay, all righty. Any other questions, committee? I just have one more for Scott Schneider from the Restaurant Association. How, Mr. Schneider, how would this impact, restaurants' decisions? Obviously, this would probably chase them out of a city that impose those type of restrictions, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. If you couldn't actually get the energy sources that you needed to produce your product, you're not going to go there. You're going to go somewhere else. So it would have that detrimental impact. But, and if I might deviate, I do want to say the act needs to be uniform across the entire state and have uniform applicability, or what happens in Kansas is the locals will use their constitutional home rule and charter out. So to the question, this act, I believe, is uniform, and every locality who has would be under the same restriction, regardless if they didn't have a public utility source or if they had a municipal source. They would still be restricted from deciding that on the public utility side. So to that extent, that is a very important piece of this preemption.
One other question. I think you mentioned the Berkeley litigation. That's still in litigation. There's still, I'm assuming that are these residents of Berkeley that are fighting back against those imposition of restriction? Are you familiar with that case?
I am a little bit familiar. I haven't followed it as closely lately, but the California Restaurant Association is the one who filed the suit, and that's why they have a standing complaint, because can the association stand in the place of a private citizen in Berkeley? And the courts are going to have to walk through that. But the challenge is, if the Restaurant Association can't be the litigant, who has the money to go sue the city of Berkeley? sue the government. So there's some of these very practical things, and dealing with this up front, I think, would just create some certainty as we all move on.
Thank you. Senator Warren?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Schneider. In your industry, are you the second largest, your association members, employers in the state? I think in some counties you're one of the largest employers, your association
Traditionally,
members?
The industry has been about a fifth of the economy. It's a very broad industry, the restaurant and hospitality side of things, yes.
And then the restaurant and hospitality side of things, do most of those in the industry, does each entity use both natural gas and electric for their sources of energy?
They can, absolutely. So think of the flat top cooking grill. Well, what fires the flat top cooking grill? In a lot of places, it's a natural gas cooking grill that the flat top is heated by. Some places they have an electric flat top, but you know, in a lot of the Asian diners, it's straight up fire used by natural gas. And one thing I do want to say, if you do have fire or a barbecue, it's really hard to buy insurance. Most of the insurance that is sold, if you have a barbecue joint, is through Lloyd's of London. There's not too many insurance companies will even write it. So understanding where you're getting your energy is very important to a restaurant making decisions as they move forward. So,
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Any other questions from the committee here? Seeing none, I want to thank you all for your testimony. I did make a statement that was incorrect at the beginning. The written-only testimony is not in our packet, committee. It is online, and that'll be the case also for the testimony that we hear tomorrow. So tomorrow we will hear the opponents of this bill, and for that we will follow the same rules as we did today. With that, I believe the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all for being here.